Taking it down to a much more individual level, I mean, one of the jobs of an MP is obviously to represent their constituents, and constituents sometimes have much more micro issues, let's call them. How do you balance that? How do you actually represent individual or help individual constituents with their problems?
For me, I think the significant part of being an MP is about representing the needs of constituents. I think as an SNP MP in particular, one of the things that I won't be doing is getting caught up in Westminster life, the Westminster bubble. And it is a bubble. It's quite a different environment to the real world. I've already said it's quite detached from the interests and the objectives and the aspirations of my constituents. So I will be focusing on the needs of my constituents. And, what will I be doing to help them? Well, I've already started. I think in the last couple of weeks, I've probably written already something like 120 letters for constituents on issues like insolvency, redundancy, visas, driving licences, benefit claims, the list goes on and on. So we're already doing that, and we will continue to do that. What I want to do, one of my priorities now, is to establish a constituency office, which we will do in Brora, to retain some staff so that we can really start to make significant headway on the issues that my constituents are already bringing to me.
You secured 46% of the vote in your constituency. The maths would tell us that 54% of the electorate voted for different parties and therefore have different political beliefs from you. It always intrigues me when you hear politicians saying that we'll represent our whole constituency. How can you do that when so many people within the constituency do have very different beliefs from what you have?
Yeah. This is one of the challenges of the first past the post system, isn't it? It's the individual that gets most votes who wins the day. And that's what's happened on this occasion in every seat across the UK. This is the system that Westminster has put in place, and this is the system that the people of the UK voted to keep just, I think, in 2012 when we had that referendum on proportional representation. So that's the system. That's the system that we work within, and that's the system that we will continue to work within. You're absolutely right. It is a challenge to represent the needs of everyone in the constituency, but that's a challenge that I've set myself, and I've been public in saying that that is what I will do. It's of no consequence to me who the electorate voted for. If an individual has a problem, I invite them to come to me, and I will do my level best to help them in every way possible. And I think that's already happening. I already see that in the mailbag. I have people writing to me saying, I didn't vote for you, but so on and so forth, and that's fine, and that's exactly what I want to see happen. So regardless of who an individual voted for, I am the MP, and I will work my level best to deal with their issues without fear or favour.
It's fair to say, though, you mentioned first past the post system there, it's fair to say that SNP have been real beneficiaries of that in this particular election. Does that mean it goes on the back burner as an issue for you?
No, I think the SNP is committed to proportionality in terms of elected representation. And I think we have been the beneficiaries of the first past the post system on this particular occasion. In the past, it has worked against us. When it's worked against us, the established Westminster parties have been very happy to see that be the case. Now that it's worked against them, we are starting to see them starting to argue perhaps for elements of proportionality to creep into the system. That's not something that we're going to be able to control. That's something that the UK government will have to have a think about, and that will be debated, I suppose, in the House of Commons at some point in the future, if that's the issue. But, in terms of democracy and how our democracy works in the UK, I think, that personally, I think there are much bigger issues than the first past the post system that is used to elect MPs. And I would cite the House of Lords as an obvious example. Already 2 weeks into my role at Westminster, I'm starting to see the influence of the House of Lords, the unelected House of Lords, and how that impacts upon the legislation that has been developed, the policies that are being put in place, and the actions of the UK government, not least in the fact that David Cameron has just appointed an unelected peer to be the Under Secretary of State at the Scotland office. And that's an individual that was responsible for implementing the poll tax in Scotland, probably one of the most unpopular policies we've ever had. And David Cameron has just ennobled that individual and put him into a significant ministerial position. I think that's unacceptable. Those sorts of actions are unacceptable. So in terms of democracy, I think there are some really big issues that need to be confronted. The House of Lords, arguably for me, is right at the top of that list.
But isn't it the reality that most of the electorate actually kind of lose sight of the whole electoral system and get caught up in the day-to-day economics and what impact it has on them, and therefore it will never change?
I think there's an element of truth in that. I think people in Scotland, as I've said already, have got quite a sophisticated understanding of the issues and who's responsible for them. So most people will be able to tell you what's an issue that relates back to the local authority, what's an issue that relates back to their MSP in the Scottish Parliament, and what is an issue that relates to the Member of Parliament and the UK Parliament. So people have that understanding. I think people are quite switched on to the fact that sitting above all of that, we have that unelected tier of House of Lords. And there was indeed a bit of a backlash after the election results were announced in terms of people wanting to ensure that a lot of these MPs who lost their seats didn't somehow find their way back down to Westminster, having been ennobled and turned into a lord or a lady. So people were quite switched on to that, and I think quite rightly wanted to make sure that what we're developing in London at Westminster is actually a democracy and not simply an old boys club for people that have lost their seats.